Combine week. Yes, Kevin's Corner. We're back recapping Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen from earlier in the week. And, Eddie, we're going to play a little Nick Sirianni, right?
Yes, sir.
Well, Nick Sirianni action in the podcast. He joined us, Kevin and Query, our morning show earlier this week. We'll throw that in here if you missed it. Some Shane Steichen thoughts, some comments, certainly on his actions at the end of that game back in November here at Lucas Oil Stadium. So looking forward to you guys getting to experience that conversation we had earlier this week. Eddie, good to see you, man. Appreciate the 2 pods in 1 week.
No problem. It's like you can't get away from me. Been hanging out every day over at the convention center, too.
And that's a good thing. I always enjoy hanging out with you. And, yeah, this is just kind of what this week is about. You know, for someone like me, you kind of split it up into segments. The early part of the week is more about the coach-GM part.
Yep.
You kind of wait for your coach and your GM to talk. You obviously will get some information that we'll share on that. And then the rest of this week, we're recording this late Thursday morning. You'll get into workouts, and we'll see the measurables for Bryce Young, and the Jalen Carter situation will continue to play out. And we'll come back early next week, start to look at free agency, recap any other combine tidbits that might have developed over the weekend. So let's focus again on Ballard and Steichen here to start off. We'll play the Sirianni interview right before Twitter questions. And then we'll call it a day.
Right before we get into Steichen, so I was leaving the convention center yesterday, and I ran into a prospect. He's a quarterback.
Okay.
Max Duggan.
Oh, I was going to guess Aiden O'Connell.
Yeah, I ran into Max Duggan yesterday on my way out. Great guy. He reminds me a lot of Taylor Heineke in the way that he's going to provide that grit and toughness. It's often not too often you see a guy who had the success he did at TCU this year. And he's talked about, in those middle rounds. So some team could get lucky with a solid backup.
Yeah, I'll be curious where he goes. I'll be curious where Aiden O'Connell goes. I mean,
Me too.
If this was 10, 15 years ago, Aiden O'Connell probably hears his name called on day 2 of the draft. But obviously the running element is a little bit different nowadays than it was back then. So let's focus first on Ballard. Eddie, you were over there with me yesterday. So, feel free to jump in at any point with any sort of comments. We will throw in the caveat, as we will, before every podcast from here until April 27th. It is lying season, and it is smokescreen season.
Indeed it is.
So I just want to preface that with everything. Having said that, I don't think it's like you just straight up lie for 15 straight minutes. I think that's kind of impossible to do. So we'll pick some bits and pieces out of it. We'll try to provide some context around these comments. And we will focus on that. My biggest takeaway Ballard related yesterday was, as of now, March 1st, he is hesitant about trading up. Am I shocked by that? Not really. First off, it's Ballard. We know he loves picks, and we know he's always been hesitant to take a swing at quarterback. Granted, he's got a much better bat, if you will, if you want to keep the baseball analogy going, with the 4th overall pick than he's had in years past when he's drafted a lot later. I also think it's worth pointing out, Eddie, it is March 1st. They met with quarterbacks. They have met with quarterbacks this week here at the Combine. That is the first time that Shane Steichen and Chris Ballard have probably ever talked with these guys.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of it. And you're going to have a lot of interactions with them if you want to go to their pro days, if you want to have private workouts, if you want to bring them in for top 30 visits. Between now and April 27th, you're going to complete the profile, and you might argue you'll complete the biggest separator in the profile. And that's who you are. Like, who are you as a human? Mm-hmm. How are you, what drives you? Those sorts of things. Do you want it? Do you want to be a quarterback in the NFL, which is just an incredible job on multiple levels, incredible pay, incredible responsibility, all of those things. If you think back to when they drafted Quentin Nelson 6 overall in 2018, Ballard was not totally, fully sold on it until the pro day, until that Notre Dame pro day, where he felt like he had like a Adrian Peterson type of impression on him at that pro day. It's just his unbelievable presence. So, again, I don't even know if we're halfway through the full evaluation process on these guys. So I think that is something that bears mentioning. Lastly, I would just throw in this on the whole trade-up debate. Ballard said yesterday, we think we can get the right guy at 4.
Mm-hmm.
You can certainly get the right guy at 4. I mean, hell, look at every draft. The best player in every draft is not the first overall pick. But that also means that you have no control over 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, especially with the Jalen Carter news coming out yesterday.
And I want to get to that Carter news. I think we have a Twitter question on that. But if my job is on the line, Eddie Garrison, I don't want to risk sitting there at 4. Yep. I don't want to have to dodge bullets. And I can't others have got to allow me to get the pick at 4. And then, of course, you throw in the caveat, as we mentioned on last week's pod, of one of those teams is in your own division. When you think about all of that, that is where my hesitancy comes into play here.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Something that I kind of took away, I don't know which part it was. I don't know if it was him talking to, the entire media or the spillover with the local media. He did not seem in favor of bringing back Yannick Ngakoue from that brief, including his interview with JMV. Right after that media scrum, he went over to John and was asked about Yannick Ngakoue. It didn't seem too candid.
A bit lukewarm
on
Mr. Ngakoue. I think that is a fair way to say it. Now, does the Gus Bradley return help out Ngakoue? You would think. And again, we'll get into free agents a little bit more on next week's podcast. But yes, I would agree with you, Eddie. I didn't feel like it was a slam dunk on that. Offensive line-wise, he mentioned adding in free agency and the draft. I like the sound of that. I think you need to find a starter in the interior, a right-now starter, a day-one starter, and then get a little bit of a swing tackle situation going. He mentioned depth at defensive end. He mentioned depth at wide receiver. I'm curious to see how the Paris Campbell free agency will play out. And that was pretty much it on the Ballard front. I guess lastly, no comment on the Matt Ryan situation. I am under the assumption Matt Ryan will be cut by next week, or by free agency, I should say. There's no reason why you would want to keep him on your roster past that date. And I'll be interested to see if you make any other cutting moves. It has not been a Chris Ballard thing to do at all in his tenure. To be fair, they haven't really had a lot of bad contracts that would scream kind of veteran cuts like we've seen with Tennessee here in recent weeks. The Colts have some of those now. They have a guy in Ryan Kelly that I don't think you just pencil in Sharpie on your September roster, or Kenny Moore. So, those are some names I think we have to keep an eye on. And, Ballard definitely didn't slam the door shut on making some veteran cuts.
Now, to connect Ballard and Shane Steichen's conferences together, they seemed in pretty, I would say they were in unison in terms of what they were talking about, what they wanted in the next quarterback for the Indianapolis Colts. They both mentioned processing in terms of being a fast processor. They have that edge or that it factor, depending on however you want to phrase it, and accuracy. I think those were the three things that both Ballard and Steichen talked about when they were asked about drafting a quarterback in the upcoming draft.
When you look at the quarterback trait comments, they both mentioned quarterbacks come in different shapes and sizes. That was kind of a common theme between both guys. I think the thing that stood out to me the most, Steichen related, and it's not just yesterday. The first thing he often mentions with quarterback is accuracy. Now, he threw in there yesterday, Eddie, that you can coach accuracy. Yeah, but is kind of how I view his opinion on accuracy, because he said, when it's 3rd and 8, can you deliver it? Someone's barreling down. Can you deliver? And that, to me, I think will be the single physical trait that Steichen will keep on coming back to. Can you coach accuracy? Can you coach around accuracy? Yes. But there comes a point in time in every single game where you just got to flat out rip it, and you've got to make sure it's on target, and the ball placement and all of that is there. So I thought that was the thing Steichen related. He mentioned a few times as well, what's the edge that kind of separates these guys. He told the story about Justin Herbert in the 2020 draft process that kind of went to Zoom about halfway through because of COVID, and that they gave Herbert some things to study and work on, and kind of tape film stuff. And next thing you know, they asked him about it, and he handled it beautifully. So those are things that, as I mentioned a little bit earlier in the pod, we're about to find out on. Neck up, that separator. All these quarterbacks, I think, are so similar. To me, Bryce Young stands out a little bit more than the others, but you can talk yourself, I think, into several of them. But what is that separator? And a guy who I think will have a really strong week in that area, I think it will be Will Levis. I do think Levis is a guy that's going to check a lot of Colts-centric boxes away from the playing field. And I know that, well, at least I feel like he probably is the most criticized quarterback of these four. And I understand why that is. I also think there's a lot of just other circumstances that impacted his time at Kentucky. The guy did go 17-7 at Kentucky. I mean, I don't think that is something that you should turn your head at either. I know their defense was pretty good, but that is the SEC. He had a lot of turnover at offensive coordinator. There's going to be some major projection there. You're going to have to develop fundamentally and everything. But I think that's a guy that if I were trying to map out how I think the Colts could view these guys, and I will apologize for this up front, Eddie. I don't have a lot of great intel on the Colts and their quarterback thoughts. And you know what? I shouldn't have a lot of it because that means the Colts are not doing their job.
Yeah.
But I don't want to act like I have this info and just be lying to you over the next 2 months. That'd be totally unfair of me to,
damn it, Kevin,
to fake it. So
where can I put my money?
I apologize on that front, but I want to make it very clear that a lot of my comments will come from what I think they think, which, again, I wish I had a clearer picture, but that's the reality of where you're at right now. And I think if you're a Colts fan, while I'm sure you're coming here to wish that I had some great intel on exactly what the Colts are thinking, it means the Colts are doing their job. Now we don't know what their entire thought process is with that. I could see them liking Levis, though. I could.
There's two things to me that I would be concerned about with Levis. First is the pocket awareness and the pocket presence. He is really, really bad at feeling pressure from his blind side. And he got smoked a lot because he didn't feel it. And that led to some of the injuries for this year, is that he had trouble feeling the pressure coming from the backside.
Yeah, and is that teachable?
That's a good question.
I don't give that a slam dunk that it is teachable. So that would be worrisome to me. How much of that is offensive line related? And is that pre-snap processing? Is that Carson Wentz stuff where you're not identifying enough pre-snap? You don't know where the free rusher's coming from? Boom. It's just fascinating to think about.
The second part of that, to which I think which led to that, is he had a hard time at Kentucky coming off the first read and going to the second and going to the third in a timely manner. That you talk about the processing, it just didn't seem like it was quick enough, which led to some of those unforced hits that he took.
Yeah, he is going to be one of the more, I think, debated quarterbacks in the room for these teams all around the NFL. I'm trying to think of what else Steichen related. He certainly emphasizes the throw to score point of view.
Yeah.
This is the set. We're going to have him on our morning show Friday morning. And so it'll be our first time kind of one-on-one with him. This is obviously the second time in a big media scrum listening to him. It's just words, Eddie. That's all he can do right now. You don't play football until September. If I were a Colts fan, I would love the comments that he makes about modern football.
I do too.
Throwing to score, and we're not going to be stuck in our ways, and the offense will be catered around the quarterback's strengths. To some people, this might all sound like common sense, but there are plenty of franchises and organizations and coaches in recent years that have not abided by those thoughts and are stubborn in how they handle it. And I would say the college game has really started to separate itself much more from what you think of traditional NFL pro-style systems.
Yeah.
So it's marrying that together that I think Shane Steichen has done a really nice job of in recent years, and again, will continue to do that. So for those reasons, I think if you're a Colts fan, you have to sit there and say, the reality is this: if we don't get quarterback right, we don't have a chance.
Yeah.
And this is a guy that has history and talks like someone that can create a pretty good environment around this quarterback. It's not a guarantee. It doesn't mean that it's exactly going to work out in 10%. But compared to other candidates, you have the thinking there that this is going to be an environment and an atmosphere where this quarterback will have a better chance to succeed than maybe if they were in other sorts of situations with a head coach, play caller, offensive coordinator pairing. Any other Steichen and or Ballard related comments from yesterday?
Not that I can think of. I think we've hit them all pretty much.
Again, we'll have Shane Steichen on our morning show Friday, so looking forward to that conversation. Probably replay that if you miss it on the podcast next week. Let's head to that Nick Sirianni interview, okay? This was Sirianni with us earlier in the week. We cover a variety of topics with him at the Combine. Obviously, Shane Steichen comments, certainly the end of the game, back in November, and just overall the job that he has done in Philadelphia. And probably the primary focus was Shane Steichen. So if you missed it, this was Nick Sirianni with us earlier in the week.
All right, good Wednesday morning to you. We are live here at the Indiana Convention Center, and certainly one of the more popular faces has joined us right now. I would assume the reaction, Nick Sirianni, to you coming to downtown Indianapolis maybe a little bit different than when you exited Lucas Oil Stadium back in early November. We don't need to begin with that, but Shane Steichen, the hire here, was listening to your podium session a little bit earlier. And obviously, he was a guy that you entrusted a whole lot. What will you lose the most in not having Shane with you?
Yeah, obviously, anytime you lose good people, it affects you. And Shane, I always thought Shane just had a phenomenal way about calling a game. And I started off calling games in Philly, and I thought to myself, man, I need to be able to manage the game better. And I have this great play caller who did a great job with the Chargers calling plays. I need to entrust him, and he just never let me down on that. He was awesome on that. He does a great way about calling plays, how to stay calm through the madness of a game, through maybe the head coach yelling at his direction and then still staying calm. Like Shane's was very steady. And so, that's one thing that sticks out with Shane, is just his ability to call a game, his ability, how good he is with the offense, is, how good he is connecting with players, his accountability with players. And, he's a good friend of mine. Obviously, I miss that friendship that I have with Shane as well.
You called him a special play caller. What makes a special play caller?
It's hard to say exactly what that is. It's just like, hey, calling the plays at the right time that are just, man, how did you just felt that in that moment, right? And yeah, I just felt that in that moment. Preparation also, but there's feel to it, but then the preparation of leaving no stone unturned and going through every detail that you could possibly go through to put yourself in position. Yeah, we ask our players to put themselves in every position they can. How am I running this play versus this look or that look or this look or that look? I try to do the same as a coach, and so his preparation is second to none as well.
The natural thought process, I think, Coach, for a lot of fans is the comparison to you because, for all the obvious reasons. So when people are looking at Shane Steichen coming in as the head coach of the Indianapolis Colts and they're saying, hey, this is going to be like what Nick Sirianni did in Philly. What is it like? What things do you have in common with him, maybe from approach and detriment, approach and style? And then are there any things that are different that you look at it and you say, you know what, maybe he learned from an area where there was a detriment of something I did that he could have learned from? Sure.
I think what we always try to do as coaches is learn some things from guys of what you would do and how you would do it, and take little parts of where you've been and try to, say, here's how I would do it, right? And so I'm sure Shane's taking a little bit from Norv and Norv Turner, a little bit from Frank Reich, a little bit from me, a little bit from Anthony Lynn, a little bit from Mike McCoy, and making it his own. That's what you try to do is and do what you think's right and what you're convicted in. To make sure you're running the program the way you want it to be run. And so, Shane, to say anything as far as systems go, like, he's got to figure out who's here first, right? And I think that's what Shane and I have done, and what the example of that is, like, hey, neither of us have ever run an offense quite like the one we ran this year. We had these type of players, and this is how we ran the offense. You try to cater to the quarterback first. So I think to say this is what Shane will do because we did this, and will he use some concepts from Philly? I imagine so, that he will. But he's I know what Shane will do. He'll figure out what his players do, figure out what his players do well, and he'll try to replicate that. And does that always happen immediately? No, because you got to go through training camp, you got to go through OTAs, you got to go through preseason games, you got to go through a couple. It took us about 5 or 6 games before we hit our stride and said, said, this is what we do well. This is what we're going to continue to do. And so, I know Shane will figure out what his guys do well and adapt to them, especially whoever that quarterback is.
He was here as Colts offense coordinator from 2018 to 2020. Nick Sirianni, obviously Eagles head coach, with us live at the Convention Center. I asked Shane at his opening presser the biggest thing he learned from you as a first-time head coach. He said accountability. How, as a head coach, do you go about being accountable?
Yeah, first of all, the accountability starts with yourself and admitting, when you've messed up, right? And so if I'm going to get up in front of the room and talk to the guys about things that need to be corrected from the game or from practice, I better be saying the things that I did wrong too, right? And going that way. But I think what people think is accountability, and so it starts there where you're holding yourself accountable. You want our players to get better every day, we got to get better every day. You want players to hold each other accountable and hold themselves accountable, you got to hold yourself accountable. But I think what a misconception sometimes about accountability is that it has to be negative. That's not at all accurate. And accountability, sure, when it's not done the right way, you go through your process of how you correct that action. But when it's done the way that you really wanted it to be done and way it needs to be done to compete at a high level, that's just as good accountability, because you're going crazy about that. Like, sometimes it looks like you're losing your mind, but you're losing your mind in such a good way. You're like, that's exactly the way it's supposed to look. That's exactly how I want it to look. And so, and then that's the reinforcement, man, that's exactly what he wants. And then when you do it this way, it looks good, we're playing good. So accountability starts with you. And then accountability doesn't just have to be negative, right? You want to be positive in your accountability too, because you're just trying to reinforce the actions you want to continue to have.
You're literally like the perfect fit for Philadelphia, aren't you? I'm not kidding you. It feels, it almost is like there was no other franchise that would have been a better fit.
Yeah, I guess I grew up on the East Coast.
Yeah, I mean, you know what I mean? You kind of have that Rocky Balboa, get up. Do you drink raw eggs in the morning, the whole deal?
I definitely do not do that.
Yeah, that's probably smart.
But do I love the Rocky movies? Yeah. Did I just start watching them with my son before basketball games? I did.
Have you run the steps?
You know what? I have, but he hasn't. So I need to take him.
There's your project, right?
That's an off-season vacation right there.
It's amazing. We're sitting there watching Rocky. I said, hey, what'd you learn? Work hard. If I want to beat Ivan Drago, I got to work hard. So I'm like, that's exactly what I wanted my son to say.
Hey, let me ask you about this. I mean, Kevin made mention of it, and we can make light of it now and joke around about, what it meant to you to come back to Indianapolis and win. And I think people know your relationship, your admiration, your respect for Frank Reich. And knowing the way that things ended for Frank Reich in Indianapolis, part of that's the nature of the business.
Sure.
But when Shane Steichen came to you and said, I have an opportunity, you said, oh, great. It's Indianapolis. What was your reaction, and was there any second of thinking to yourself, could there be somewhere else?
Yeah, not even a little bit. When he said it's Indianapolis, and I was just so happy. There's so many great people in this city, and there's so many great people in that building, right? We still talk to our friends over in Bridgewater where we lived, right? And then I just think about all the great people that they have in that building. I had a phenomenal 3 years here, and that starts with the people you're around every day when you go to work. That starts with the people that you're around when you live in the city. And so I told them how much I liked living here. I told them how much I liked working in that building, and I was really happy for him to have that opportunity. And imagine he'll move somewhere that has a golf. I miss that golf cart I used to have that I used to drive.
He's got to have his kid watch Hoosiers though instead of Rocky, right?
Yeah, you got to have the Hoosiers on. He's got to make the drive down the street to go see Hoosiers. But I told him how much I like that golf cart that you drive around the neighborhood with in one of those communities. That's why I miss that golf cart that I used to have. I can't have that in Philly.
What's the biggest challenge in going from? For you, was there a moment when you went from coordinator to head coach where all of a sudden you're like, oh man, now it's real? And what is the adjustment he's going to have to make?
There's always different things there. I really felt prepared. I really did, and hopefully I helped Shane, in his journey to help him get prepared as well. I just always remember Frank pulling me aside and saying stuff like, hey, when you're head coach, you're going to have to think through this just like I did right here, and here's what I did. Like he made it. He was very intentional. Frank was very intentional about helping me develop into a head coach, right? And I tried to do those same things for Jonathan and Shane. And so hopefully, Shane is seeing all those things, and he takes like I said, takes a little bit from each person that he has, and when he gets in those situations, to be able to handle it the way he thinks is right. But also when he gets in those situations, obviously you try to prepare guys as much as you possibly can and help them prepare as much as you can. But you can't go through everything, right? And so when he gets in those situations, he knows he can call me, and I know he knows he can call Frank. I know he knows he can call, his other mentors, and when he has those, and Gus Bradley, right? Gus was a big mentor for both Shane and I. When we were together and with the Chargers, I still talk to Gus, and he still helps me through different situations. So you're never going to have all the answers, and be ready to reach out and reach out to people that you trust when you need to ask questions.
Nick, last one from me. I brought it up to start the interview. Obviously, your reaction at the end of that Colts-Eagles game back in November got a lot of fanfare on our airwaves.
They were mad at me?
That's probably an accurate statement. The little bit that I know of you, I simply said that Monday, that is the competitive spirit that I know that you live with in every walk of life, not just the game of football. But it was that combination with your loyalty to Frank Reich. Is that accurate in your emotion at the end of that game?
Yeah, obviously very competitive. I think one of my friends said one of my friends who actually went to the Super Bowl had said, one of the people that he works with that came in and was like, "Did you see Nick at the end of the game?" He goes, "Yeah, that's how Nick is when we used to play Nintendo together when we were kids."
Is that you winning a beer pong game or something like that?
100%. And so then he's like, that's just who he is. But also, I was raised in a home where family was everything, right? And faith, family, football, and I can remember, if my brother's teams had a bad game, I had two older brothers, and if my brother's teams had a bad game, I'm crying, right? I got emotional about it. Or if somebody said something about my brothers, hey, he didn't play quarterback very well, like I'm ready to be really pissed off, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think of Frank as like my older brother, and that's just when that's just how you feel about your family, and you're just loyal, and because they've always had your back, you've always had their back, and you always want what's best for them, and you don't like it when it's not the best for them.
So now, what were you yelling? That's what I want to know.
That stays there.
Was it to Philly fans or Indy fans?
It stays there too.
Oh darn it! I tried.
It was just safe travels home.
That's right. Hey, you need to go, and I realize that you're fairly busy here while you're in town. You need to go to 47th and Boulevard to Hoagies and Hops, because literally the gal that runs it is from Philly.
Oh, okay.
And you walk in and you would think that you are across the street. Like, it's entirely Philadelphia Eagles
I feel like
stuff.
you might be setting me up, and there's going to be all the Colts fans
I'm telling you.
after the game.
They sit behind the visiting bench every single game, and they've been waiting for you.
They had Super Bowl specials. They had the entire place was Fly Eagles Fly.
What is it called again?
Hoagies and Hops. It's at 47.
Just south of Butler.
Yeah,
okay.
Cool. Just south of Butler.
That was one of my regrets being here. I didn't get to go to a Butler game.
Oh yeah,
I heard it was awesome.
I was at Hinkle last night for the game.
Is that right?
Yeah. It was an awesome time up there. Unbelievable success. Proud of you. I know it's probably been a whirlwind these last couple of years, but I think Jake summed it up pretty well. You fit Philly really well, and it's darn impressive.
Hey, are you and Shane next year both going to be in the headset of former Alabama quarterbacks on the field? What do you think?
I can't answer that. I don't know. Listen, I don't know what they're thinking. We don't share secrets anymore. That's for sure.
Yeah, Jim Mercy had a slip up. Nick Sirianni's not going to have a slip up here with us. Thanks, Nick. Enjoy, Indy.
All right,
appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah, that was Nick Sirianni with us over at the Combine earlier in the week. Eddie, should we hop into Twitter questions?
Yeah, let's do it. Jake is up first. He says, you and JMV mentioned you heard hesitancy in Chris Ballard's voice about trading to number 1. How much do you think of that is real? How much do you think of that is playing the media lying game?
I went back and listened to Ballard's comments a couple times yesterday, and he throws in the caveat of yet and right now. Whenever you throw in those timely words, I mean, hell, technically you're not lying about anything. you know?
Yeah.
Right now, you and I are in this building, Eddie. Like, you know, like anytime you throw those, you know, right now we haven't made a decision on that. Matt Ryan is on our football team. We haven't decided anything there yet.
Right now, you're supporting the Irish after their win against Pitt.
Yeah, Mike Bray, very hungover on this Thursday morning. Kudos to him for that. I get why he said it in the way he said it. And to our earlier point on the podcast, he's right. They're still very early in this evaluation process. So I understand a lot of it. I will reiterate this, though. What do we know about 6 drafts with Chris Ballard?
He likes picks.
Loves picks, doesn't love trading up, and he has stern requirements for trading up. You know, he is drafting Nelson at 6 overall. It was not just because Quentin Nelson was an All-American at Notre Dame. It was because he was the best worker on that football team. And if I'm going to draft you at 6 overall, I'm sending a message to my entire locker room of who you are off the field just as much as you are on the field each Sunday. So they're going to have to be blown away. I get all of that. Like that, all of that stuff checks those boxes for me. Again, where I would counter is I don't think you're in some position where you can just sit on your ass on the couch and order something off Amazon.
Yeah.
To me, I think you got to get off the couch and go and do it. And does that mean you got to sacrifice some resources? Yeah, but dude, if my job was on the line, man, I would not be wanting others to decide what's going to be on the shelf for me at 4.
Totally agree with you there. What's the decision-making process for quarterbacks when you have a young, innovative, and offensive-minded head coach? This is from Cameron. How much say does he get versus the general manager whose literal job is managing the roster? If it's the head coach's system, I have to imagine he has a lot of input for this specific position. And Chris Ballard was asked about this yesterday as well.
Yeah, it's a really good question, Cameron. And yeah, he was. Eddie, let's make a little pie chart here, okay? 100%. You're dividing it up between 3 people, or say Ballard and Steichen.
Okay.
I'll go Ballard 45. Boy, that might be too low for him. Steichen 35, Irsay 20.
I would have, if it were me, I would have Ballard and Steichen flipped.
You think Steichen has more say than Ballard?
He should, in my opinion. In my opinion, he should.
I don't disagree with that thought. I also think the beauty of Shane Steichen, and I think he can be very flexible. But,
that's the concerning part to me.
He's going to have a preference, and you want to make sure that you know, it's almost like if I'm Chris Ballard, I sit Shane Steichen down and be like, dude, I know you're brilliant. I know that you have a great quarterback history, but Andy Reid said no to Alex Smith, and Sean McVay said no to Jared Goff, and Kyle Shanahan said no to Jimmy Garoppolo. 3 brilliant offensive minds all said no to quarterbacks that had gotten them into playoff position.
Yeah.
So tell me who you really like. You might think you can win a division with 3 of these 4, but who, if you weren't calling plays, if you were sick and you couldn't come to the game, who would you want? You got to make sure that you really drill that into him. I would want more head coach, to your point. I would want that. I just am trying to gauge how I think Ballard would run the show there. And, these are 2 separate questions. One of it is, who do you like? And the next is, how do you go about obtaining that guy? Mm-hmm. Those are 2 separate things that you're going to have to sift through. We like Bryce Young 75%. To get him, you got to go to 1, hypothetical. We like C.J. Stroud 58%. To get him, we can sit at 4. How do you weigh that? Right now, my hands are going up and down like it's a weigh scale at O'Malley's, and I'm back there in 4th grade with Colleen Bowen every Thursday going to O'Malley's, and she's telling me to go weigh the fruits. Or vegetables, or both. Probably wouldn't eat any of them, to be honest with you. But yeah, that's where we're at.
But to me, still, KB, even if you like Stroud and he's the guy that you think is the guy, I still think you got to go up there and get him at 1 because somebody is getting number 1. And if it's not Indianapolis, it's somebody else, and they will take quarterback.
I do not disagree with you. We had Field Yates on our morning show this morning, and I said to Field, chances quarterback goes 1, 2, and 3. And I said 50%. And he said probably, maybe a little less. I mean, we could be looking at the 2021 draft.
Yeah.
Lawrence, Wilson, and then the trade up for Lance. You know, once that first one comes off the board and that second one comes off the board, and
it's a mad dash.
We have a Jalen Carter question because I think the Carter news could impact some of this.
Yeah, that's the next question. All right, that's from Damon. He says, KB, do you think this Jalen Carter situation will hurt the Colts or anyone's chances to move up to the first pick? I'm thinking Chicago may be hesitant to move down if Carter is removed from the equation. And just a quick update on the Jalen Carter situation, KB. I don't know if you saw this or not, but not Ian Rappaport, but Adam Schefter is reporting that he is back here in Indianapolis to do his interviews, weigh-ins, and a full evaluation process.
Yeah, I guess he's got good Delta miles maybe to get back from Atlanta that quickly, man. Or maybe his agency is footing the old private bill on that one. Okay, I think we know the Jalen Carter story by now for those that listen to this podcast. It's just a tragic story with his teammate and a staff member dying in what I believe is a road rage-ish incident. Maybe not road rage, more of a reckless driving, drag racing sort of situation here.
Yep.
Is probably the more accurate description of it, and Jalen Carter left the scene. That is the report on this. So obviously a lot of legal stuff to play out. My question is this. Do teams soften their stance on Jalen Carter? If you believe the report, he lied to police. This is not a guy that had a crystal clear blue trait character card coming into the combine.
Correct.
I should say before the incident. So I say all that to say, how do Chicago and Arizona, how do they view this? I mean, that is something that I think you have to look at. Is you could probably look at it one of two ways, Eddie. My first thought was this. Jalen Carter potentially just removed himself as a top 5 pick. That means Chicago and Arizona say, we are really open for trades.
Yeah.
Because now we don't view him in that light. We cannot take him as high as we originally thought we could. So that was my first thought. Then I was talking to some people, and they go, well, how about this counter? Now that means Will Anderson means even more.
Yep.
And so now Chicago might not want to trade 1. Or if they trade 1, they're only going back to 2. Knowing Houston will take a QB at 1, they'll get Anderson at 2. So does Chicago look at it and say, we can't go back to 4? Arizona's going to take Anderson at 3. You follow that? I know it's a lot of hypotheticals that I just threw out there, but that is kind of all what's racing in my mind. And I think our listening audience is, for the most part, pretty up to date with a ton of draft stuff. Hell, a lot of you know more about it than I, but I think the consensus is Will Anderson and Jalen Carter were the 2 clear names that were deserving of top 5 picks. The 2 non-quarterbacks. I don't think anyone else has cemented themselves in that group just yet. So that's where this really comes into play. So I know the Colts drafting Jalen Carter was never something that we really will discuss or should discuss, but it has a domino effect without question on the Colts. And again, I think you can look at it one of 2 ways. Maybe now he's no longer viewed as a top 5 pick, so that means Arizona and Chicago say, all right, no player in our mind is worth it here. Let's move on back and have a quarterback-needy team come screaming up for it.
Yeah.
Or the Will Anderson angle of, again, it just means more on Anderson now, and that will be the pick that you see from one of those 2 NFC teams, and then the other one would then trade back.
And there's always the weird angle of this all. It doesn't affect his stock at all.
Sure. And that is totally, again, I'm not going to act like I have all the information here. I know somebody brought up yesterday, what about the Henry Ruggs situation? To be fair to Jalen Carter, I don't believe alcohol was involved in this situation here. I believe misdemeanors were the early charges on that. It's not like this guy is, I don't think this is taking him out of round 1 or anything like that.
Yeah.
I don't act like it's to that level, but
it's not a Laramie Tunsil situation.
No, but it's something you've got to sift through, and it's something if you're Chicago and Arizona, and you're in such a we need to find a defensive guy, would you want to go a little bit safer than maybe Carter?
With Cam Turner being hired as the quarterback's coach and his history of working with quarterbacks like Cam Newton and Kyler Murray, do you think it sort of shows the hand of the Colts leaning towards a quarterback like Bryce Young or Anthony Richardson? Tanner's question. I may be thinking too much into it, but both of those rookies have been compared to Cam Newton and Kyler Murray, respectively.
Yeah, I understand the question from Tanner, and I think he points us out there. I wouldn't read that much into it. I mean, we did the pie chart just a few minutes ago, Eddie. I don't think Cam Turner is going to have an overwhelming amount of say in the quarterback draft pick. I mean, certainly you'll ask him for his opinion, but I don't think it's going to be the end-all, be-all. And you know what? Chris Ballard said this yesterday, Eddie. Everybody's mobile nowadays.
Yeah.
I mean, Aiden O'Connell's not going to get drafted in the first 60-some picks. And a big part of that is because he isn't a guy that's going to move a whole lot. So I think that is part of it. This offensive staff is fascinating to me, Eddie, when you look at it. And it hasn't been finalized yet, but I think it's worth pointing out. If you look at the quarterback's coach, Cam Turner, the running backs coach, DeAndre Smith, the wide receivers coach, and Reggie Wayne, the tight ends coach, and Tom Manning, and the O-line coach, and Tony Sparano Jr., Eddie, they have combined, those 5 individuals have combined to be full-time position coaches in the NFL for 5 seasons. 5 guys have combined to be position coaches for 5 total seasons. Cam Turner's had 2. DeAndre Smith's had 1 at this level. Reggie Wayne, of course, just had 1 at this level. Tom Manning had 1 back in 2018. And Sparano's never been a full-time O-line coach. It's a youthful offensive staff. I mean, very youthful. Now, what you like, and I've mentioned Tom Manning before, and I think Cam Turner brings some of this, I like the young, innovative. We've worked with young quarterbacks. In Manning's case, he's called some plays. Turner was the pass game coordinator. You know, there's parts of this staff, youth-wise, that I do like. Would I like to see a little bit more balance, probably a little bit more veteran in the O-line? Yes. You know, it sounds like they've got some really strong reviews on Sparano from ex-players that did play for him and that side of it. But it's a big contrast to defense. You know, defense, you got a ton of experience. And I think with every staff, you're trying to achieve some level of balance. But I do think that's just it's an interesting part to the Shane Steichen coaching staff.
Certainly is. Scotty says, here's what I see happening for the draft. Chicago trades number 1 overall for number 2 and number 12 with Houston, along with a Houston second-round pick of next year. Chicago then trades number 2 to Indianapolis for the 4th overall pick, this year's second-round pick, and next year's second-round pick, and a player, probably Kenny Moore, and will continue to stack from there. What are your thoughts on that?
You know, Scotty, if you handed me a piece of paper right now and said, Kevin, pick the draft order. Okay? Who's drafted 1, 2, 3, and 4? With not a ton of confidence, I would say 1 will be Houston, 2 will be Indianapolis, 3 will be insert team here, 4 will be Chicago. Now, the Jalen Carter thing is maybe throwing a bit of a wrench in it. Does Chicago still look at Will Anderson and Jalen Carter and say, hey, if we go back to 4, we'll get one of them and we feel good about it? Do you still feel good about Jalen Carter as a top 4 pick? That's, I think, a question that you have to ask yourself. Now, when I say team 3, Arizona, pick 3 is Arizona, Eddie, look at the 5 teams right behind Indy.
I know.
And I don't have this in order, but I believe it's Seattle. Actually, I think this is in order now that I say it off the top of my head. I think it goes Seattle. I think it goes Detroit, the Raiders, the Falcons, and the Panthers.
Correct. In that specific order.
So one more time for our listening audience.
Seattle, Detroit, Vegas, Atlanta, Carolina, New Orleans.
Which is Philly, right? Philly has
10. Yeah,
has
sorry.
New Orleans pick. So you go there 5 through 9. Eddie, you can talk yourself into quarterback for any of those 5, right?
Oh, yeah.
Any of them.
Yep.
And all of them have got to sit in a room and say, guys, we like Jared Goff. We like Geno Smith. We don't plan to be in the top 10 next year. This is our chance to bridge and pass that torch a little bit. It's such an unbelievable opportunity.
The one group I
sit there in the top 10, it's time to take advantage of it. So I think that is something that we haven't discussed enough.
I think the one team out of that group that's going to be really bad that will be there in that top 3 again next year, that's Atlanta.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree with that. What about that team sitting there at 9?
Yeah. Sorry, Ken Myers walked by.
All good.
Give us a thumbs up.
You and I were both there for Frank Reich yesterday.
Yeah.
He was candid.
About Bryce Young, too.
He was. He talked a lot about Derek Carr and their meeting with him. David Tepper is a very aggressive owner. Look at that coaching staff.
Look at the money.
They are paying a whole lot to that coaching staff. What do they do? Now, it's going to cost a lot to come up from 9 all the way to, and they have an additional second. Is that correct? They got San Francisco's second for the McCaffrey deal?
Yeah.
So they do have that. But boy, if Brian Decker's now in Carolina, does he have any intel on what the Colts would? Yeah, I don't know, man.
Certainly fascinating. Austin wants you to rank these quarterbacks in order that you'd like to see them on the Colts. C.J. Stroud, Bryce Young, Will Levis, Anthony Richardson, Hendon Hooker, Justin Fields. Let's also pretend all these players would go at that number 4 pick. Thanks.
It's a good one from Austin. Really good one. I'd probably go Bryce Young. Then I think I'd go Fields. Then Stroud. It'll sound negative with Stroud, but I think he is the safest.
Totally agree.
And again, I know that comes with a negative stereotype, and some would say, well, I don't want safe in the top 5. I look at the AFC right now. Would safe just get you the 6th best quarterback in the AFC? I don't know. I'd probably go Levis, Richardson, and Hooker to round it out. Boy, that's a good one.
I would probably go.
Yeah, how would you do that?
I would go Stroud, then Young, then Fields. Richardson, Levis, Hooker.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't.
Because I think there's a lot more to C.J. Stroud that wasn't tapped into at Ohio State. I think there's a lot more creativity that you can do with him and moving the pocket and with his legs. And
I mean, certainly the semifinal would point to that. My argument against, I have Young ahead of Stroud.
Yeah,
you and I have, would disagree on that, and I understand the Bryce Young concerns. I'm not going to act like, the height and weight is not something that I think about and think, Kevin, you might be a total idiot with this. That'll sound crazy to some. But I'll stand by this. Ohio State had an overwhelmingly more talented offense around C.J. Stroud than Bryce Young had at Alabama.
Especially this year.
Right. And I mean, let's just focus right here on this year. I mean, that Alabama offense, maybe Jahmyr Gibbs, maybe the Cathedral offensive guard goes like in the 4th or 5th round, something like that. No one's getting drafted early out of that Alabama offense. Whereas you look at Ohio State, and even without Smith and Jigba, I mean, Marvin Harrison, of course, is going to go in the top 5 next year.
Emeka Egbuka will be a first-round pick next year.
Both their tackles are going to go very high. Obviously, their running back situation, whenever those guys become eligible, they're going to go high. And just in general, I mean, the Big Ten, outside of a game or two, it's a joke.
Yep.
And you get a lot more of that out of
the SEC?
Out of the SEC. And I don't know, maybe is this some of I watched C.J. Stroud very intently against Notre Dame, and I wasn't overwhelmingly impressed. I don't think it's that. I want to make sure I throw that out there because I'm literally decked out in Notre Dame gear today because Mike Bray is an absolute legend, and he needs to go, by the way. Let me make that very clear. But that doesn't mean I don't love the human being for everything he's given me as a fan over the last 2 decades. Boy, it's such a great debate, man. Stroud versus Young.
It is.
Such a great one.
Final question comes from Creighton. Colts are obviously going to be drafting a quarterback. Throughout the NFL history, what year is a quarterback most likely to make the Super Bowl? I'd guess year 2 or year 3.
It's a great question.
Mahomes did it in year 2. Burrow did it in year 2.
Yeah, I would certainly lately, Eddie, you've had the rookie quarterback contract success.
Yeah.
You know, Goff was on the rookie quarterback contract. Wentz was on it. I know Foles was the QB, but they got into that position with Wentz, being on that quarterback contract. So over the last handful of years, it's been the rookie quarterback success that has helped get you to that game. I tend to go with kind of get you to the game. Brady can skew a whole lot of this when you think about his age and, how old he was in getting to those Super Bowls. Boy, I know Mahomes is about ready to enter this age group, Eddie, so this might be a dumb statement in 5 years, but I don't think we've had a lot of 28 to 33-year-old quarterbacks in the Super Bowl.
No.
Lately.
No.
It's
Stafford?
I guess Stafford probably would have qualified as one of them. Well, would he have been in that age range, or is he older than that?
It
feels like it's either been Brady or young guys. And I know it's not that simple, but that at least is kind of where I think it's been. Obviously, you had Peyton a little bit. You've had a Rodgers. You have to go back a little bit to get to Roethlisberger or get to Eli. Or
he would have been 33.
Stafford was 33.
Yeah, because he's he would have been 33. He just turned 35.
Okay. I think, and Ballard was asked this yesterday, to me it's just such a critical time, Eddie, when the Colts make this selection, and I would be stunned if they do not take a quarterback. Let me reiterate that. Boy, what a critical next 4 years it is to build.
Yeah.
I know I've mentioned this before, but kudos to Jacksonville, who said, our rookie quarterback just had a really, really difficult first year in the NFL, on and off the field, Trevor Lawrence. We can't take any chances. So what we're going to do is we're going to pay B players in free agency A money, and we're going to get laughed at, and people are going to tell us we're idiots. But if we don't get Trevor Lawrence right, our franchise is screwed for the next X amount of years.
Yeah.
So they did that with Evan Ingram, and they did that with Zay Jones, and they did that with Christian Kirk. And they got Trevor Lawrence right.
Mm-hmm.
And now Trevor Lawrence, moving forward, should be able to help you in making other skill guys better when you needed the reverse of that to happen this past season. So that is the time that the Colts theoretically are about to be entering, where you can be a little bit more active in free agency. You're still going to have to hit on rookie contract guys because you're still going to have to build with that quarterback, of course.
Yeah.
But that's what you're going to have to make sure that you do. It's that Peyton Manning goes 3-13 in year one, and then you give him the leading rusher in the NFL the next season in Edgerrin James. That helps you out big time. Now, I know that's draft and not free agency, but it's finding that combination of both is going to be so vital for Chris Ballard moving forward.
One final thing that I wanted to bring up that just struck my mind. It was a position group that received a lot of scrutiny over the season that Ballard spoke highly about, both at the podium with the local media and then again with JMV, and that was the tight end group. He seems really, really...
the Colts tight end group.
Yes, yeah. The Colts tight end group. Yeah. He seems like that group will take another step forward, and I think with Shane Steichen now into the mix, I think that is true because we talked about it throughout the course of the season last year. Kylan Granson was top 5 in the NFL in separation, and he just did not get the ball often. The same with Jelani Woods. He was really good with the ball in his hands, but they just didn't find ways to get him the football. And then they get Drew Ogletree back, hopefully, and they really like him based off of what Ballard told John yesterday.
There is, and I would agree with that. I think that's a very smart takeaway to have from that. I understand the intrigue at tight end and a little bit at wideout. I mean, he still is, very bullish on Michael Pittman and Alec Pierce specifically. I would like to see one veteran pass catcher added here in a few weeks.
I would agree.
It's a really bad wide receiver group in free agency. Tight end has a little bit more, not a ton, but tight end has a little bit more. Obviously, the inline blocking aspect of the tight end position to me was a concern last season, so that'll be something to keep an eye on. But I just, it's a group that has intrigue, has youth. You would think there's some development. It's a lot of second and third and fourth round draft picks within those two rooms. But I just would like to, I'd sleep a little bit better at night with another one.
Yeah, a couple of names that quickly stood out to me regarding the wide receivers. That'd be Jacoby Myers and DJ Chark, and maybe Alan Lazard. But that's about it, really.
I like Lazard. I do. Yeah, I have liked him. And we're about to find out, Eddie, Chris Ballard's actions compared to his words. I know a lot is, and I've been the one asking him this question each of the last two season-ending press conferences. Do you feel like your roster building approach needs to be altered? And he has answered it in a very similar manner each of the last 2 years.
Yep.
And last March, I didn't see a whole lot of altering to it. Does 4-12-1, does that hit you in the face? Does the firing of your head coach, does drafting 4 overall, does that hit you in the face a little bit more? Probably does. What will the actions be off of that? And we're going to find out a little bit of a glimpse into that here in less than 2 weeks. Anything else, Eddie?
No. Have a good weekend, man.
I will. He is Eddie Garrison. I am Kevin Bowen. Everybody have a great weekend. The month of March is here, one of my favorites of the year for the obvious reasons of...
It's madness.
It's madness, free agency madness, and then March Madness. Weather is improving. Golf season is nearing. The Masters is nearing. And Mike Bray's time at Notre Dame is over. Gosh, I'm being so critical of that man. He is such a good human, and I love him for so many reasons. But, Eddie, defense, they suck. Their roster building has been awful, and you need some juice in the program. New juice.
Sounds very familiar.
Not Jameson juice, which is what he was consuming last night. Everybody have a great Combine week. Enjoy it. We'll recap it early next week on Kevin's Corner.